Welcome to another deep dive. We're all about taking those intriguing sources you send our way and, well, diving deep into them to see what we can uncover, especially for you, our listeners.
Yeah, and this time it's a particularly unique one, right? A transcript from a YouTube video titled ECLIPSE Marty 2025. So get ready to explore some pretty fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. So we're dealing with a recorded investigative hypnotherapy session. It features Elena and Carmen, the hypno operator. Elena's in a hypnotic state, and she's sharing some really interesting perceptions about, well, a few things. First, the planetary alignment happening on February 28th, then the lunar and solar eclipses coming in March of 2025.
What makes this deep dive so cool is that we're looking at these events through this metaphysical lens, as Elena experiences them in this altered state. Now, we're not here to judge whether she's right or wrong. We just want to understand her perspective and see what we can learn from it. And that includes both her esoteric interpretations and any physical consequences she talks about.
All right, so let's jump right in, shall we? First up, this planetary alignment on February 28th. Elena paints it as a huge turning point, almost like the end of an era and the beginning of something entirely new for humanity, like a new chapter in our evolution.
It's interesting how she describes it as a jump to another quantum level, almost like a change in the very fabric of reality. She even suggests that things we could previously only sense might become more tangible, like visual, material, or even energetic.
Yeah, like we're shifting into a whole new way of perceiving things.
Yeah.
She uses this cool analogy of a gravitational pull and push happening at the same time, with all the planets drawing each other closer magnetically.
A simultaneous pull and push. That's thought-provoking. Makes you wonder, what if this really does signify a quantum leap in consciousness? What would that even look like for us, practically speaking? Like, how could we prepare for such a shift or even recognize it when it happens? Something to ponder for our listeners.
Absolutely, and Elena doesn't stop there. On a more physical level, she believes this alignment actually affects our chakras, aligning with them.
Right, chakras, those energy centers often described in different spiritual traditions.
Exactly. So she's saying that this alignment might help us focus more on what's happening inside us rather than outside. And in terms of what this might mean for the world around us, she talks about a dismantling of old ideas and outdated ways of life. Long-standing patterns and structures that have been with us for like millennia. It's a pretty fundamental shakeup, at least in her view.
It is a striking image, isn't it? And it does seem to resonate with a lot of what we see happening around the world these days, right? Social norms shifting, political landscapes changing. There's definitely a sense of old structures being challenged. And Elena takes it a step further. She suggests that those who cling too tightly to these old ways, those with closed minds, might actually disappear or fade away on the physical plane.
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement. Is she suggesting that people might literally vanish? Or could it be more of a metaphorical fading away, becoming irrelevant in this new reality she's describing?
That's the question, isn't it? Whether it's literal or figurative, her point seems to be that resisting change on this scale could have some serious consequences. And it's not just at a societal level either, right? She also talks about this destructuring happening within us as individuals, affecting our mental and behavioral patterns.
Right, so it's not just out there in the world. It's a deeply personal process as well. And she believes it's already underway, which is kind of unsettling if you think about it.
It does make you pause, doesn't it?
Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about the lunar eclipse, the blood moon happening in March. It's set to occur on the night of the 13th to the 14th. And apparently it'll be red for about 65 minutes. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Energetically, Elena senses this feeling of fire and burning.
Burning. Is she saying the moon itself will be on fire?
No, not the moon itself, but something else. She describes it as a fissure, like a crack or line in a semicircle that separates the metaphysical and physical planes. She even gets specific, saying it's between Terra and the ionosphere or stratosphere. And just to clarify, when Elena says Terra, she seems to be referring to Earth in this context.
So a crack between Earth and the ionosphere or stratosphere. That's a pretty unique take, especially when you consider that she's not talking about the typical image of portals as these spherical tunnels. Instead, she's describing them as these spatial temporal cracks, these fissures.
Right. And these cracks, she says, allow energies from the universe to pass through. It's a normal process, apparently, driven by differences in energetic potential. Something about these opposing exponential energies. It gets a little complex there.
It does sound a bit complicated, doesn't it? And as humans, we have this tendency to try to analyze everything, connect it to what we know, find patterns and explanations.
Absolutely. Elena even points that out. She says, we often try to make sense of things through logic and find comfort in what's familiar and predictable. But she also says that the universe, well, it doesn't always play by our rules. It works in ways that we can't always measure or fully understand, at least not with our current way of thinking.
That's an important point. And when it comes to this crack, she claims it happens when the magnetic connection between Earth and the moon is at its strongest.
Right, and she attributes the reddish energy to this significant energy difference between the two at that particular moment. She even suggests it could amplify temperatures and, get this, influence Earth's consciousness itself.
Now, that's a powerful thought. This idea of a link between these cosmic events and our collective consciousness, it comes up repeatedly in her descriptions. She states that these processes always mirror the level of consciousness on the planet, which supposedly influences major historical events like revolutions, political shifts, even wars.
It's as if she's saying that these aren't just random events. They're connected to a larger unfolding story of humanity's evolution.
A story that's deeply entwined with the cosmos.
Okay, so from a more mystical perspective, she sees the reddish hue of the blood moon as representing a kind of burning away, a dismantling, or even a destroying of what's old and no longer serves us. And again, this is all tied to energy and consciousness.
So it's not just a physical phenomenon. It has a deeper energetic meaning.
Exactly. Metaphysically, she sees this blood moon as beautiful. She sees it as a process of these old, stagnant energies being purged, even transformed at a very fundamental level. She uses the term monoatomic level, which I think refers to changes happening at the level of individual atoms, at least within her understanding.
So amidst all this potential upheaval and disruption, there's also this element of renewal, a making way for something new.
Right, and it gets even more intense because for about 5 to 8 days around this eclipse, the moon will actually be closer to Earth. Elena says this intensifies the magnetic forces between them even more. She talks about these fissures moving all around the planet during this time. There's even this agitation of what she calls ships around our system. And she mentions the possibility of satellites malfunctioning because of the increased magnetism.
That's quite a dramatic picture she's painting. And while the idea of increased tidal forces during closer lunar proximity is well established, these ships and energetic disturbances are not something recognized by mainstream science. But again, we're trying to understand her perspective, right?
Of course. Now, she also mentions that geophysically, there could be eruptions or tectonic movements, as a natural consequence of these energies.
So potentially some very real physical effects on the planet itself.
Right, and she doesn't shy away from how different people might interpret this blood moon. For some, it might just mean danger, like a bad omen. For others, particularly those into esoteric stuff, it might be seen as a time of change and transformation. And then there were certain groups, some cults, who might see it as a sign of a new world leader arriving. And of course, there are religious folks who might connect it to prophecies and miracles.
Quite a spectrum of interpretations. And it's a reminder that these celestial events can evoke very different reactions and beliefs depending on one's worldview.
Absolutely. But then she kind of throws us a curveball by saying, from a purely astronomical perspective, it's just planets doing their thing. Earth tilting a bit on its axis, all normal occurrences. So there you have it. It's all in how you choose to interpret it.
Right, a cosmic Rorschach test of sorts.
All right, let's move on to the solar eclipse, which happens on March 29th. Elena says this is a time when multidimensional portals open up, and it becomes easier to connect with entities from other planes of existence.
Multidimensional portals. Okay, now we're getting into some serious metaphysical territory.
And she's not just talking about any kind of connection. She's specifically referring to telepathic communication, a direct channeling to other planets, which she believes leads to faster communication.
So she's essentially saying that the solar eclipse acts as a cosmic amplifier for telepathic communication, creating a more direct connection across vast distances.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. But here's the kicker. She warns that thoughts can materialize super quickly during this time. She even uses the word attention, almost like a warning to be mindful of what we're focusing on because it could manifest more readily.
Makes you think twice about those negative thought spirals, doesn't it?
Definitely. And there's more. She talks about the possibility of what she calls psychotronic attacks being amplified through technology.
Psychotronic attacks, that's not a term you hear every day. What exactly does she mean by that?
Well, it's not a concept recognized by mainstream science, but in some circles, it's this idea of using technology to manipulate people's thoughts and emotions, basically messing with their minds.
That's a bit unsettling. So she's saying that the solar eclipse might make us more vulnerable to these kinds of influences.
Possibly. There's like this period of heightened energetic sensitivity where both positive and negative influences can be amplified.
It's almost like she's saying we need to be extra careful with our mental and emotional hygiene during this time.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to this rapid manifestation of thoughts, will, and reality, Elena's not necessarily saying it's instant physical manifestation. She's talking more about an immediate shift in the fabric of reality itself.
So it's more about the potential of our thoughts and intentions to shape our experience in a more profound way during this time. And she's saying this can have both positive and negative outcomes depending on where our focus lies.
Right, like we have a greater responsibility to choose our thoughts wisely because they might have a more immediate impact.
It's almost as if she's saying the universe is listening more intently during these times.
That's a really interesting way to put it. So let's shift gears a bit and look at what Elena sees happening as a result of all these alignments and eclipses. On a more physical level, she anticipates younger generations kind of waking up, becoming more open in their consciousness and remembering their true nature.
Sounds like a pretty hopeful vision, like a new generation coming in that's less bound by the limitations of old ways of thinking.
Exactly, and they might even reject the norms and structures that older generations try to impose on them. Elena describes it as them experiencing a click, like something suddenly shifting into place in their understanding.
A generational awakening of sorts.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, energetically, things get a little wilder. She talks about this stirring across different planes of existence, with Earth's energies becoming wavy and vortex-like. But she's not talking about physical tsunamis or anything like that. It's more about energy movements.
So like energetic waves and swirls affecting everything and everyone.
Right, and she says this can lead to a feeling of boiling within us as individuals, almost like all this energy is bringing up stuff from within.
A period of intense internal processing, perhaps even a bit of chaos.
Yeah. And on a larger scale, she sees all this leading to the downfall of certain leaders and companies, while new ones rise up to take their place. She sees it as a year of major shifts and changes, with nothing staying the same.
So buckle up, folks. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
She also talks about how everything that's been hidden or buried within us, both individually and collectively, will come to the surface because of this boiling energy. It's like how carbonated water brings those bubbles to the top. She even points to April as a key month to watch for these changes unfolding.
So a time of reckoning, of facing our shadows.
It seems so. Okay, so let's look at the blood moon from a more historical and mythical perspective. Elena says that mentally, people often associated it with catastrophe, like the end of the world as they knew it. But energetically, she sees it as a positive event, a purging of what no longer serves us. And she defines catastrophe in this context as the surfacing of everything we've kept hidden, our bad habits, our secrets, all that stuff.
So a clearing out of the old to make way for the new, even if it feels scary or disruptive at first.
Right, and here's the thing. She suggests that only about 2% of the current population is truly ready for these upcoming changes. But she predicts that number will jump up to 50% initially, which of course begs the question, what happens to those who resist?
Yeah, what about those who just can't or won't adapt? What does she say about that?
Well, she suggests that those who resist might experience all sorts of physical and mental symptoms. Nervousness, agitation, dishonesty, schizophrenia, headaches, denial, even something she calls combustion.
Combustion. Now that's a strong word. Is she talking about spontaneous human combustion or something more symbolic?
It's not entirely clear. But it definitely sounds intense. And for those who are adapting, she paints a much brighter picture. She talks about understanding, shifts in consciousness, and freedom from limiting patterns. And here's an interesting tidbit. She sees autistic children as being particularly attuned to these changes and even excited about them.
So a wide range of potential experiences depending on how we navigate this transition.
Absolutely. Okay, let's wrap things up by looking at how Elena sees this whole transition process eventually playing out. She uses this really interesting analogy. She says it's like an older person looking back at their 13-year-old self. The future feels completely normal to those living in it, but from the perspective of the past, it might seem strange or even confusing.
I like that analogy. It highlights how our current perspective can limit our ability to fully grasp what's possible.
Right, and she says our thinking and the way we conceptualize things will be totally different, like a new wave of understanding. And having an open mind will be the norm, not the exception.
So a complete paradigm shift.
It seems so. And sociopolitically, she sees a breakdown of old systems and the creation of new ones that are more aligned with this new way of being. She even talks about interdimensional entities, those beings from other dimensions that sometimes pop up in esoteric discussions. She believes there will be some sort of agreement about how different living spaces are allocated, both physical and metaphysical, and eventually this will even include the physical realm as we know it.
So, a restructuring of how different types of beings coexist, both within and beyond our current understanding of reality.
Exactly. And she believes that the entities currently within what she calls the physical matrix, that system of control and illusion that some folks talk about, will eventually leave and not come back. Something about their subliminal parts detaching permanently.
That's a pretty significant claim. So, these entities essentially exit this reality and don't return. And it's not just a random departure, there's a deeper energetic component involved.
Right. And she also talks about group consciousness setting limits and protecting itself from lower vibration interferences, specifically mentioning what are sometimes referred to as reptilian and draconian entities. She suggests that these interferences will become more individualized rather than impacting groups as a whole.
So the power dynamic shifting, with individual consciousness playing a more prominent role in resisting these negative influences.
Right. And she ultimately concludes that the most important power source in this new era will be the power of consciousness itself.
The power of consciousness, that's a recurring theme throughout her descriptions, isn't it? Like a fundamental truth underpinning all these shifts and changes.
Absolutely. So let's look at this connection she draws between the blood moon and our chakras. She says the planetary alignment mirrors the 7 chakras, and there's a specific link between the blood moon and the first 3: grounding, family and collective systems, and personal power. She believes these systems will be shaken up, leading to a dismantling of negative dynamics, like secrets and manipulations within families and groups. Even marriages and partnerships built on unhealthy foundations might dissolve, bringing those hidden aspects into light.
So it's not just about cosmic energies influencing us. It's about how these energies interact with our own energy systems and the systems we create as humans.
Right, and she even goes as far as to say that this seemingly fixed and rigid matrix, which she attributes to these reptilian and draconian energies, is being challenged by the universe's constant motion and change.
So a battle between stagnation and evolution, with the universe siding with evolution.
It seems so. Okay, bear with me for a minute, because Elena then goes into this whole explanation about the differences between magnetism and electricity, or light. She says magnetism is about attraction, while light is about polarization.
A subtle but important distinction.
Right, and she points out that light has a frequency, while magnetism doesn't. Magnetism can exist across a range of frequencies, both high and low. And while electromagnetism, the combination of the two, is all around us, she believes that pure modulated light feels better energetically. And those entities, without those subliminal parts she mentioned earlier, the ones that exist primarily within their own specific frequency, apparently prefer magnetic energy because of its attractive nature. She even goes into how electrical energy involves a potential difference and doesn't always lead to an intersection of fields unless there's an attraction. Electromagnetism, on the other hand, is all about intertwining.
Wow, that's getting pretty deep into the weeds of energy dynamics. But it does highlight the complexity of these forces and how different beings might interact with them in unique ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, for those who are transitioning to a higher frequency, and she clarifies that this doesn't necessarily mean full enlightenment, just a general energetic shift, Elena believes that the physical body is basically forced to either evolve or self-destruct. She's talking about releasing negativity, malice, grudges, envy, victimhood, manipulation, all that stuff. She's pretty adamant that there's no choice in the matter. We have to move with the change. And she reiterates that the planet and the universe are constantly in motion, and whether we accept it or not doesn't change that reality.
So pretty stark choice. Adapt or face the consequences.
It seems that way. And for those going through this transition, she describes a bunch of potential physical sensations, or sometimes even the absence of sensations. She mentions amplified emotional states, nervousness, muscle, and joint pain, which she sees as the body adjusting to these software changes. She even talks about a period where thoughts manifest more quickly, which can be used to heal physical ailments by consciously detaching from what she calls implants or external negative influences, and she's convinced that negative emotions like anger and frustration can manifest as physical illness. But through it all, she believes this transition is necessary, even if it's difficult, because it brings everything hidden to the surface to be dealt with.
So it's about facing our shadows, integrating those hidden parts of ourselves, and ultimately evolving.
Right. Now, looking ahead, Elena sees this transition continuing to impact society, potentially creating a bigger gap between generations. She believes the non-physical aspects of new physical bodies will be different, with changes happening at the DNA level. She calls it a new software that will affect our sensitivities, something she says is already happening with all these food and environmental intolerances we're seeing. And she links these physical adaptations and genome modifications to the introduction of chemicals into our environment, suggesting that new generations are fundamentally different as a result.
That's a bold statement, isn't it? Like we're witnessing a kind of evolutionary leap driven by both energetic shifts and environmental factors.
It's definitely a lot to take in. Finally, Elena talks about this concept of staying inside, which she describes as a process of intentionally looking inward to examine our thoughts, reactions, and ingrained patterns. She emphasizes that it's not a one-time thing, but an ongoing commitment to self-awareness and recognizing that the external world is often a reflection of what's going on inside us. She even sees psychology and psychotherapy as tools to help us do this, to identify what she calls traumas, which she defines as the unresolved emotional baggage we carry in relation to others.
So it's about taking responsibility for our inner world and understanding how it shapes our experiences.
Exactly, and she uses this analogy of two people who both believe their perspective is the absolute truth, when the reality might be that both are operating from a place of negativity. She suggests that by paying attention to our thoughts and reactions, especially when triggered by external events, we can gain valuable insights into our own issues. She also talks about co-creation, highlighting how relationships are rarely the fault of just one person. And she believes that being in this 3D reality involves identifying with external programs, and that focusing on suffering and powerlessness can blind us to the fact that these feelings often originate within us. By recognizing and detaching from these programs, she thinks we can break free from their control.
So, a call for self-awareness, introspection, and personal responsibility.
Right, and to wrap it all up, we go back to the question of whether Elena senses a change in Earth's energy since those March eclipses. And her answer is a resounding yes. She says these alignments basically act as a catalyst for the changes that are already happening. The planetary magnetism is aligning, although each planet keeps its own unique vibrational potential. And she sees this as mirroring our own chakra system, where blockages or imbalances can disrupt the flow of energy. The planetary alignment and this flow of magnetism, according to her, bring all that negativity to the surface within us, sometimes amplifying it. And on a societal level, she sees this playing out as well, with old beliefs and systems being challenged and dismantled. It's a process that she believes goes way beyond 2025. So an ongoing evolution, both individually and collectively, fueled by these cosmic events and our own choices. That's a great way to sum it up.
Yeah.
But we've certainly covered a lot of ground today with this Eclipse Marty 2025 transcript. It's definitely given us a lot to think about.
It has, and as we said at the beginning, we weren't trying to endorse or debunk any of Elena's perceptions, but rather to explore them and see what insights we could glean from her unique perspective.
Right, and hopefully our listeners have had some of their own aha moments along the way, maybe even seeing connections they hadn't considered before.
It's always fascinating to see how these seemingly distant cosmic events might be intertwined with our own lives and the larger story of humanity.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to ponder. This idea of staying inside, of intentionally turning inward to examine our thoughts and patterns. How might this be helpful during times of great change and upheaval, both personally and globally? Could this inner exploration be the key to navigating these turbulent times with more grace and wisdom? Something to consider as we move forward.
Food for thought indeed.